to this same group at this same conference to launch a campaign for a new consumer agency. And I want to say, at the time we first started talking about this, not many people had much idea of what a consumer agency could be. And the few who did have an idea pretty much saw it as a pipe dream. There weren't many groups who were willing to listen, and not even many academics who, let's face it, were in the business of producing pipe dreams. But for them, it was too ambitious, too far-reaching, too impossible to accomplish. But it was not too ambitious for you. You listened, and you started working to turn the idea into a reality. You helped organize an epic David and Goliath fight. And you helped create a new watchdog over financial products and services and a new voice for families in Washington. Everyone in this room knows how this one unfolded. First, there was the CFA and a handful of other early organizations. And then we grew. Ultimately, there were more than 200 groups that pushed for the consumer agency. And it was joined by many, many informal groups and just individual citizens around the country. Bloggers and people who wrote letters to the editor and people who spoke out at town hall meetings, people who signed petitions, people who wrote their members of Congress. We fought together. We fought side by side with President Obama to get this agency passed into law. We didn't have a lot of money on our side, and the odds were definitely against us. We were up against an aggressive lobbying campaign, Wall Street players, special interest groups with massive budgets. But no one buckled. We stuck together, and we took them on. And in the end, American families won. They got the financial watchdog that they need. So today, 2 years later, I am here for two reasons. The first is to say thank you. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. I wouldn't be here without you. And the second is to talk to you about new priorities for this agency. Because think about where we are. We are about to build an agency from the ground up. And it is right now, at this moment, when we breathe life into this agency, that we have an opportunity to set it on a path to make a real difference for American families for decades to come. Think about the headlines over the last few years. Think about the headlines over the last few days. Financial crises, foreclosures, fraud. We have a chance to do better. We have a chance to create stronger, fairer marketplace where hard-working Americans have a chance to prosper. I can think of no better opportunity. The question is, how do we get there? How do we pick up these tools, and how do we use them in the most effective way possible? Now, I think a lot of people assumed that what this agency would do, many of the people who voted for it and probably everybody who voted against it, would be that this agency would just start doing targeted rulemaking. And after all, there'd be good reason for that. The credit market is infected by many bad practices. And those bad practices are costly to Americans. They destabilize families. And ultimately, they destabilize our entire economy. There is an important place for targeted rules and enforcement actions that are aimed at those abuses. But we limit what we can achieve if we narrow our focus to targeted rules. Let me give you an example from the CARD Act. Credit card customers are far better off after this legislation passed. And I know what an important role CFA played in getting it passed. 2 years ago, before the CARD Act went into effect, there were credit card practices that really hammered families, practices that are now illegal. Today, families are saving money because of the CARD Act. The Card Act makes credit cards safer for consumers, and it makes it harder for card issuers to hide the real cost of credit. But the Card Act also illustrates the limits of the specific target approach. Even before the Act was passed, industry lawyers were looking for those slightly different ways to accomplish things that the legislation was intended to outlaw. So I'll give you an example of that. The new legislation and the rules that the Fed put into place outlawed certain kinds of repricing, retroactive rate increases on existing balances, and hair trigger revocations of promotional rates. The idea was you couldn't go from the interest rate that you thought you had to a much, much higher interest rate without a little pause in between. There needed to be a more significant breach of the agreement before you got there. Now, before this law even went into effect, clever lawyers had figured out an alternative, and that is give the higher interest rate to all of your customers and then give them all discounts. So the customer experiences this still as the lower interest rate. Thinks, oh, this is my lower interest rate. And then, the minute something goes wrong, withdraw the exception and accelerate them back up to the higher interest rate. Same effect as what had been banned, but at least according to the company that initiated it, within the letter of the law. Now, to its credit, the Federal Reserve stepped in with new rules now, so they're going to respond to this response to the rule. But notice what happens in the meantime with this approach. The complex pricing continues to cost families more money until the regulators act, and the regulations become thicker and more complex and more costly for the good guys, for the folks who are really trying to follow the spirit of the law. So the problem is that targeted rules don't fundamentally change credit markets. Even today, there are lots of lawyers at work trying to find other ways to get around the specific restrictions in the Card Act. And even today, consumers still see pages of fine print and worry about what's buried inside. The Card Act stopped many enumerated bad practices, but customers still don't have a fighting chance to read a credit agreement or to know the real terms of the deal. So that means we need to think differently, or need to think, perhaps a better way to say it is, more expansively about credit regulation and about credit markets. You know, once credit terms were understandable. Now, too many creditors use complex terms so that it's not possible to determine the price in advance, and it's not possible to comparison shop from one product to another. Too many creditors have decided that there are profits to be made from keeping customers confused or uncertain about costs and risks. The consumer credit market is broken, and we need to repair that market. When a customer can't know the price or the risk of a product that she's buying, then the market doesn't work. When a customer can't compare straight up one product to 2 or 3 other products, then the market doesn't work.